Howdy, folks. Richard Avery with Titanium Computing, the element needed to keep your business running. Today, I've got Chris Kirch from Rumble.run. And he's got decades of experience in cybersecurity with multiple extra special flags, specifically flags that he's captured at DEFCON 25 with a black badge. And he's part of the what I like to call the Microsoft Office for Hackers group. He helped develop Metasploit with Rapid7, which is one of the largest cybersecurity companies that's here in Austin, Texas, where I'm based out of. So I've got a huge soft spot for that team and some of the members on it. I'm here showcasing the product with him and talking about cybersecurity with our normal fireside chats that we're kind of doing now. This is 7/9/21, right after the Kaseya incident, which is all the rage right now in the news. Chris, thanks for coming on and talking to us. I really appreciate you taking the time out for our listeners, watchers, and so they can learn a little bit about your product.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I am shocked that I still get to talk to such people like yourself and learn about all these great things and talk about this kind of stuff. It's kind of turning into a dream job. So I like to do NIST 800 series stuff. I used to work for the DoD, and I used to write a bunch of compliance. And one of the problems that everybody talks about, I also used to work for RGIS, do inventory for Walmart and Sam's Clubs. So inventory and asset management for me is a big deal. Like, how many devices do I need? Everything's license based. Everything's how many laptops? What do I got? How many interfaces do they have? Rumble.run. If I'm phrasing that right, it's kind of like GIF, right? How do you say the product properly? Because how I use the product and how it's said are probably two different things. And how does that really solve that particular challenge?
Sure. Yeah. So Rumble is a software, a SaaS solution that helps you figure out what you have on your network. So if you think about it, just start out with your home network. We're usually deployed in companies, but even if you just go think about a simple network like your home network, you probably have a lot of smart light bulbs and your router and your old laptop and this control for that TV and your PlayStation and all of that stuff on the network. And you probably have already lost an overview of all of the things that are connected. Now, if you think about a bigger company that has been in existence for sometimes decades of years and have all these different departments that have plugged things in and people that have left with turnover in the IT department and shadow IT and legacy and all that stuff, it gets really hard to even know what's on your network. So the typical conversation I have is either with security or IT. On the security team, people reach out to us and say, hey, we get this spreadsheet that the IT team puts together manually about all the things that are connected to the network, but we know it's outdated and we know it's got gaps. How are we supposed to protect the network if we don't know what's on it? And so with Rumble, they can go in, they can scan the network, and we tell them exactly what's on it and help them with some of the misconfigurations, orphaned devices, devices that had served a purpose at one point, but now they no longer have an owner. Maybe they no longer have a purpose, and they pose a risk for the organization. So just these kind of like network hygiene issues is what I call them. And then we've got the IT team, and they often are trying to put together what people call a CMDB, and it's a configuration management database. It's basically a fancy term to say the IT team wants to know all the things that are on the network so that they can manage and support it and do things like software licensing, like you mentioned, right? And so Rumble helps get accurate data into the CMDB, especially for the devices that you don't manage, because a lot of the solutions out there are great for inventorying all the stuff that you manage, like all the laptops that you've handed out to users and the servers that you have provisioned. But they're really bad and failing badly when you're trying to figure out what are the other things that are on the network, what the marketing department, what the finance department, what the facilities team has put on the network to make their jobs easier. And for those, you don't have usernames and passwords. For those, you don't have the ability to install a piece of software on it because you don't even know the thing exists and you don't have a username or password, right? And Rumble, basically, all you need to do is put Rumble on the network. It'll start scanning the network and it'll tell you what's there. And the way we do that is you mentioned that I used to work on the Metasploit team, right? My co-founder is HD Moore, and he is the creator behind Metasploit. And what he had to do as part of building a tool that simulates an attack, a hacking attack on a network, is he had to first figure out what's there, because you need to figure out what's there before you can attack it, right? And of course, in a simulated attack, we call this like an ethical hackers or a penetration test, right? In a penetration test, you don't get any credentials. You don't get software installed on the devices to figure out what's going on. You have to do that just by having one computer on the network or plugged into the network, and you have to figure it out from there. So he's just become really good over the past 2 decades to figure that out. And instead of attacking the network, he took all of this really cool hacker mindset knowledge and put it to solve a problem that's really one of the most mundane and simple things in the world, which is asset inventories, which is basically counting things on the network and telling you what it is. But for some reason, like, companies have tried to do this for, I don't know, 10, 20 years, and it's still super hard. So we still think this is an unsolved problem.
I would totally agree with the unsolved problem analogy.
Yeah.
Especially when, like you mentioned, facilities. Most people don't really view their smart TV as a cybersecurity risk, but it is. Like, it's a machine you don't control. You don't have a login and a password for it. You can't control updates. It's all controlled by the vendor. The vendor might just decide one day not to support it. That TV shouldn't be on your main network. And how do you scan and be like, oh, the facilities guy plugged that in the wrong jack, or some MAC address I need to discover. So
yeah, and
NASA,
what's your and what's your corporate policy and process for updating your smart TVs? You probably don't have one, right?
It's kind of like I need to update the Bluetooth device. I mean, we talk about car hacking, right? I got to update the Bluetooth driver in my car. How do I go do that? You got to go to the manufacturer. You go to the vendor, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to charge you $250 to update the Bluetooth driver in your Ford Fiesta." You're like, "What? Why can't I do this myself?" So Rumble would have been great for NASA. They had the Raspberry Pi hack where they tucked the Raspberry Pi up in the wall. I can use Rumble not only as a cybersecurity defense device, because I can be like, hey, every Thursday when I run these scans, I have 47 devices, and today I have 48. Why do I have 48? What device is that? Do you see people using that as a cybersecurity defensive weapon as well as an inventory asset management?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We sell, I would say most of the conversations that we have are with a security team. But still a good chunk is with the IT team. I think it's because both HD and I were the 2 founders. We come out of the security world. We understand that a little bit better. And our personal network, just if we, send out tweets or LinkedIn messages and so on, it just gets picked up by that audience more. So we have a little bit of a skew towards that. But it's really we built Rumble actually primarily for the IT team, because we see that problem there as well. And when a lot of companies come to us and say, we have this database for the CMDB for our asset inventory, but we don't have any good data to put into it, because none of the other tools that we use on the network that weren't made for asset inventory, like my vulnerability scanner and my antivirus tool or EDR tool or my mobile device management tool, they all have like part of the picture, but none of them have the entire picture, and they're missing all of the unmanaged devices, right? So they're really coming to us to fill that in.
And if I'm not mistaken, Rumble you guys are being very generous with it. I think it's free up to a full subnet, 256
Yeah.
devices, right?
Yeah. So, if you think about smaller companies are really at a disadvantage when it comes to cybersecurity because they don't have the specialization in the organization. They can't afford some of the expensive tools. So we decided to make our software completely free for personal or commercial use for up to 256 assets. So it's not just your IP space, but actually how many devices you have on the network. We have a lot of, IT geeks who just run it on their home network, and that's fine, right? We have small companies that run Rumble completely for free. That's also fine, right? And then we have an affordable pricing strategy to ease people in when they're smaller because they can't afford, like a $30,000 price tag that some of the bigger solutions are charging. But we also scale up pretty well. So, for example, I think our biggest company that we serve is a Fortune 5 company that scans all of their M&A targets. Like when they want to acquire a company, they scan all of those targets with Rumble because it's very quick and easy to do it. And and we have people in all sorts of industries. A lot of IT networks. That's where most of the use cases are. But surprisingly, also a ton of what's called OT networks, so operational technology. Anything that is, I'll give you some examples if you're not familiar with the term OT, or maybe some of your listeners. These are environments that operationalize something. So think of a utility company, or a water treatment company, or we scan car manufacturing plants. We scan sawmills, put a tree in on one side of the building and you get 2x4s out on the other side. So all of that equipment. And so it's not only on the IT side that people don't know what they have. It's actually also on the OT side, because folks have been so, this part of the network has been really not that tightly managed in terms of the inventory. The IT team usually only has partial visibility into that. It's usually a different team that runs that. And so there are a lot of legacy things out there. And now these OT environments are increasingly connected to the internet. Everybody says they're kind of air gapped, but when you actually dig in, they're not really air gapped, right? They have controls in place, of course. They're not just, on a public IP. But these kind of environments, when you are able to, when an attacker is able to penetrate those defenses, then they can actually cause real harm, right? They can bring down your production plants. They could do some physical harm, or if you're lucky, it's only a ransomware attack that locks down your factory. But still, you wanna know kind of what's there so that you can inventory it and then decide on what kind of network hygiene issues you want to address and kind of clean up.
One of the things that I thought of while you were talking about that, when I do a physical penetration test, and this isn't any different for me than it is for everybody else. It's here's the Raspberry Pi, here's the device, here's the thing. We're talking now, and the new 2nd generation Bash Bunny from Hack5 just came out.
Yeah,
and sold out in a day. It's might as well be an NVIDIA video card at this point. So when people are bringing in, I'm bringing in a secondary device to have another exfiltration exit, whether that's a secondary network, a Wi-Fi, a VPN. When we're doing those asset discoveries and network discoveries, does Rumble help with that?
So yes and no. So we do detect secondary network interface cards. Okay. So most commonly, and the reason I say yes and no is most of the time it's not to detect an active attack like you described, right? Yeah. But it's actually to find misconfigurations on the network that could put the network at risk. And they are not always intentional. So think about a laptop that's plugged into the wall socket with the network cable, but also is on the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi might be the guest Wi-Fi, it's untrusted, and your wired network is trusted. So now you have a machine that if it got breached, somebody could jump from the guest Wi-Fi, which is untrusted and open, into your internal network and then pivot from there. So, and the same thing is true for machines that are in your demilitarized zone. So that means they have a public IP address, like a web server or a mail server, and they also have a second network interface card on your internal network. So you want to know which ones those are, because sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's a misconfiguration. Or if you're accepting credit cards, for example, you typically have one part of the network that's called the cardholder data environment. It's where you store your credit cards. And under PCI, you have to have that firewalled off to make sure that even if somebody gets into your internal network through a phishing email, for example, you have another layer of defense to protect that CDE. And so we will find machines that basically have a network card in the CDE and your regular network, and would enable an attacker to go around the firewall by going through that device, right? So those kind of things. But we also find all sorts of other, I talked about network hygiene issues, and I think I need to be a little bit more specific on what I mean by that. It's, for example, before we started this podcast, you talked about a pen test where you were looking for like an old version of a protocol called SMB, so SMB version 1, which can leave a machine open to attack, right? We can find all of those on the network. We can find all of the ones that use like an old encryption standard, like TLS 1.0 on a web server. We can help you also find things like remote management tools run on public IP addresses, right? If you have a machine and it's got RDP enabled or VNC enabled, that enables you to take over the, basically dial into that machine and take over the screen and do some remote work. If you have that on a public IP address and somebody is able to guess the password to get in, that's a big risk, right? So we can find those kind of things because those are often entry points for attackers, for ransomware crews, and then they go from that point to another. I said ransomware a few times. I think ransomware is not the primary thing we protect against, but if you look at what like ransomware is just big in the headlines right now, you need to have really good security hygiene in your overall network, not just asset inventory, all of those things, all of your controls to protect against ransomware. I'm just highlighting that because I think knowing what you have on your network and just finding the low-hanging fruit that an attacker could take to get in, it's just really important. It's part of the picture.
You're right. Part of our playbook at Titanium is to have jump boxes inside our clients' environments so that we can spin up VMs or we can do discovery and we can do other concepts, which is for most small IT MSPs, that's like just not in their playbook. It's not, oh, we've got customers' machines or their servers, or well, we can interact with something else. Having using our own jump box that we can do that kind of scanning, that kind of discovery, pretending to be a bad guy, and what can the bad guy see? I think it's really important. So you are finding secondary interfaces, and this is when we write NIST documentation, normally we're breaking out, or we used to before Rumble. We would break out, an Nmap scan or, a Slitherus, or we would have to do something else to do some sort of device inventory, to do software, approved software list, approved hardware list, like where are we at, what do we got on the device, on the network, and why should it be separated? It's certainly very generous of you to have such a large scope for organizations to be able to use it. Beneficial for all of us to bring the security level up, protect, because it's the small doctor or dentist or chiropractor that has our medical data, and very I argue in the community, I say, hey, we're not being good stewards of this, because we know these guys typically aren't secure, but we're still giving them all our medical information.
Yeah. So in a scenario like yours where you have a jump box and you're trying to protect, let's say, a dental practice, right? So that dental practice will probably have a pretty flat network, right? So there is no segmentation, no firewalls going on. What you would simply do is you put what we call an explorer on that jump box. And it's a pretty lightweight piece of software, 20 megabytes or something. And then it'll scan the dental office once a week, once a day, once a month, depending on what schedule you want to set. And it'll just tell you what's on the network. It's very, very simple. The Explorer will upload all of this information to our SaaS platform. So you don't need to run your own server. And you can then search for things. You can alert on certain things that you might want to know about. So for example, the like RDP on a public port. And that's pretty much it. Like we do one thing, we don't do one thing well. And that's giving you visibility into the assets. And that can help you on the security side, but also on the IT side. We see, for example, for let's say you have Cisco hardware or Fortinet or whatever your vendor of choice is for your networking gear. Our scans can actually tell you like what is the serial number, and we let you export it so that you can check on the vendor's website if the device is still under warranty. So those kind of things where we really help you also do just the regular IT management.
It's easier to have tools that do this for you than trying to do any of it by hand. They're trying to rediscover the wheel. Can be very painful.
Yeah, you mentioned Nmap, for example. Nmap is a great tool, right? I know that every security practitioner, especially in pen testing, uses Nmap to map out a network. Where Nmap is not great. I mean, it's great for security scanning, but it's not great for asset inventory because it will tell you that a particular device is running, like it might tell you it's running Linux 2618, but it will not tell you, hey, it's a Google Nest camera with this firmware version on this port on this switch, right? And it's got these other ports open, et cetera, right? So Rumble will tell you a lot more about the device itself. And then also when you're thinking about some, like a dental practice will have maybe some medical devices, but it's not in the same sense that a hospital does with like ventilators and MRI machines and so on. But when you're going into that kind of a space, oftentimes, people are reluctant to scan with Nmap because Nmap sends what I'd call like security probes, right? It sends some little bit more aggressive traffic to see if a device has a certain security issue. It might send malformed IP packets, and that can destabilize some devices. In the best case, it's just a printer that spews out a configuration page after rebooting. But if it's a ventilator, that's an issue, right? And so with Rumble, what we've done is we've built a scanner from scratch that is super clean in the network traffic that it sends out, and you can configure it to be extremely safe for the environments that we're scanning, especially for each endpoint that you're scanning. So we can limit for example, the amount of traffic that you send to each node.
That sounds super useful, especially in the medical field or in the financial field where people are very sensitive over timeframes and production and hey, don't scan this network because all of our important stuff's on that. Well, that's the networks the hacker's going to scan. Why are you omitting the important stuff? Which happens all the time. So we've had a lot of ransomware, lots of craziness, like you mentioned in the news lately. What would be one of the things that you think that all companies should be doing? I mean, besides running Rumble, in their security infrastructure in helping elevate and protect themselves against threats?
Yeah. So I think it gets back to basics. One is patch your systems, right? Make sure that when the little bubble pops up, that you update your machine, even if it's not convenient right then and there. Because the reason why Windows or your Mac or whatever system is offering you an update is not only to give you new functionality, but also because there are security issues that they want to patch. And it's exactly those kind of issues that a lot of attackers are exploiting. So number one, patch your systems. Number two, I would make sure that you have good backups of all of your machines. Because if you get ransomware and you have a good backup, it's going to hurt because you're going to have to put the stuff back, but at least you won't have to pay the ransom. And then number three, I think, is use strong, unique passwords. So I'll give you an example. I have like an interest also in like online investigations and those kind of things. And there are some databases that you can get access to that include all the public breach data. So I could, Richard, I could look up your email address and see what passwords you've used in the past on sites that have been breached. So now if I'm trying to get into your company, I'll just look for your email address and I'll take those passwords and I'll try, hey, this was like for a LinkedIn breach or some, I don't know, social media site, something that you really don't care about, that's not important. But if you use the same password there as you're using for your company, then now I'm in, right? So weak passwords, password reuse, or also using very simple passwords is often how the bad guys get in.
Password 123 doesn't work anymore? I shouldn't be doing
that. It works great for the attackers.
It certainly, you know, I was doing a presentation the other day and I was showing, I use a website called Dehashed to look.
That's the one I was referring to.
From a combination of you real quick, fast, dirty, truepeoplesearch.com, Dehashed, you know, have I been pwned? Every piece of data I have about myself is already out on the web, from my passport to my social security. I did DOD work and I was part of the OPM breach. So everything I have is out there. So you just have to be like, hey, you're forced to give this data over to someone, and then they might not control it well. And it seems to be that nobody is controlling it well. And that's a certain problem that we're going to have to face continually going around this road. People who just don't seem to care that they're stewards of other people's identities.
Yeah. When I think about how to protect yourself from a social engineering perspective, right? If you are
which you're an expert
using if you're using things to authenticate people that are public knowledge, then your authentication is worthless, right? Yes. If you're asking somebody to like if you're calling into a call center and all they're asking you for is like, okay, your name, your address, and maybe your email, right? All of that stuff is usually pretty easy to figure out. And even, you know, that you have a mortgage, who you have your mortgage with, what car you're driving, you know, the reason that you're getting all the junk mail to do an extended warranty for your Toyota is because there are public databases that have all that stuff. So if you're relying on those kind of things to authenticate somebody over the phone, whether it's for a company or, for the support desk at a company, like what their policy is to identify an employee, or if it's somebody calling you and pretending to be your bank or your mortgage company or your, whatever, don't trust any data that is publicly available. And it's sometimes, like, for the average citizens, it's not always easy to know what's publicly available. But we just talked about your password being publicly available.
Yeah.
That's scary, right? So you have to really think about those. If you design those processes, you have to think about the processes and design those. And you have to think about, even as a private citizen, what kind of information is out there? How could somebody get to that? And you have to think really carefully. And sometimes I had a hunch that it is the right company calling me, but the information they're using to authenticate themselves is not sufficient. And so I would rather hang up and dial back, even though I think it's probably the right company, than to hand over some information to an attacker.
It's funny because most of the social security number you can figure out from where they were born. Where they're born is public record.
That too, yeah.
The important part is the last four, but that's what everybody asks for. So that gets breached the most. And then
Yeah.
somebody's calling up, I have a very important financial
So
decision
you only have 2 digits
to
left,
discuss.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have an important financial matter to discuss with you. Please give me the last 4 of your social to verify. And you're like,
Yeah.
I don't know who you are. Why am I going to give you anything?
Yeah.
And when people create passwords, I tell people, hey, if you owned a 1976 Mustang and 1976 and all of that should not be in a password for you anywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it's
And
easy to look that stuff up.
Yeah, like for example, just go to what is it, progressive.com or any other car insurance company. If I type in your address and your name, it's going to say, which one of these 3 cars would you like to insure? Because it has that in the database. So just by knowing, by looking up your name and address in white pages, I can now go to Progressive. Now I have your car, and then I go to some other websites and I get a ton more, right? So figuring out this information is for somebody who is somewhat skilled in the art and has spent a little bit of time thinking about it, is actually pretty trivial. So be careful what you put out there. I personally have taken my name out of a lot of databases that are out there. That's a ton of work. But the very least you should do is just freeze your credit with the credit bureaus. So there's TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. Those are the big 3. You should do at least those 3. And freezing your credit is free, right? I'm not talking about credit monitoring or there's also a security alert, right? Credit monitoring is something that they sell you and you pay a monthly fee, but it just alerts you when somebody's access to your credit doesn't actually block them, right? So it's like an alarm system to your house, but you're not locking the door. A security freeze or a credit freeze actually requires you to unlock it when you're opening a new credit card or getting a new car loan. And that is a better way to go about it. So, have it closed by default, and only when you want to access it, unlock it.
And that'll cut down on that spam you get in the mail of all these extra credit card
That too.
Offers. We'll bring it all the way down to the common person.
Yeah.
What benefit do I have as a regular person on the road? Oh, I'm not getting 900 offers from Capital One every week.
Yeah.
When you do that. So,
and to be frank, it's a little bit of a pain when you're trying to open a credit card and so on. They're usually, now they're used to it because so many people do it. But essentially, let's say you're trying to open a new credit card or buying a new car. What they'll say is, hey, I tried to pull your credit and it looks like your credit is frozen. Could you unfreeze that for me? Then you go onto the Experian website, you log on, you say unfreeze the credit for the next week or 2 weeks, or sometimes you can also do like give out a special PIN code to the company that's trying to get your credit. So that only they can access it, because otherwise you're leaving the door unlocked for the next 2 weeks, which is also not a great thing. And that's pretty much it. And then afterwards, after that period, it locks again, and the next person would have to ask you again. But I think that's one of the most important things that you can do, because your credit is actually worth more than your net worth. If you think about it, like if somebody steals all the money in your bank, it would hurt. But they could actually borrow more money in your name than you have in the bank, and that hurts even more.
You could make $100K a year, but get a $700K house, right? So you're absolutely right. The damage that can be done can be significant. Or worse, I can sell the house. You could be living in somebody else's house and not realize it. There's a lot of wire fraud scams that hit the realtors and the realty market. One last question. So those are some great advices to everybody should be following in today's cyber age, if that's even a thing anymore. I make a phone call and I appoint you as the czar of cybersecurity for the United States of America.
Oh, dear God.
What's the first thing you do? You can do anything you want. What is the one rule you implement now to elevate the security of all of the United States?
Wow, that is a really hard question.
You
know what? It sounds weird because it has little impact on companies, but I think it's one of the best things that you could do to protect the average consumer. I would freeze everybody's credit by default.
Freeze everyone's credit by default.
Because if like the system that we have today is made for the convenience of the credit bureaus and the people who want to sell you credit. It's not made to be optimal for the consumer. So if we want to stop all of the identity theft and that kind of stuff, I think freezing credit by default and having people unfreeze it, willingly unfreeze it when they want to take out a credit would probably be a really good thing. And it's inconvenient for the credit bureaus. I get that. But the upside for the population, I think, is much better. That's one of the things I would start with. And that's, and that affects people positively, even if they never touch a computer, right? Some people say like, oh, I don't need to worry about like identity theft because I never touch a computer. And they're still in all the databases. They're still going to be in white pages. They're still going to be in the progressive database because they have the car, and the car companies sell, or the insurance companies sell the data or whatever. So not being online is no protection.
In the movie Hackers, serial killer talks about in a scene that you can do nothing and your name goes through 17 computers a day. Now it's like 17 million computers a day. Your computer goes through everything. And I think that's actually a great answer, because I know someone here in Texas who had an account opened in their name at a furniture company. They maxed out the furniture line of credit. It was like $25,000 of furniture credit. And literally they loaded it all up into a trailer and just drove it across the border to Mexico. So it's just gone. $25,000, took all the furniture, gone. It's across the border. And they were on the hook for it. Well, I mean, they managed to prove it wasn't them, but that's costly. It's time consuming.
And it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
Right. If you've ever, I had a colleague who had his identity stolen, and it takes you years to clean that up. It's a huge hassle. Nope, I know that freezing, unfreezing your credit is a little bit of a hassle. Cleaning up identity fraud is like really impacts your life.
That I'm gonna put that in my playbook. If I get called on, if they call me and say you're the czar now, right? I'll give credit to you. That's a great choice.
All right.
So thanks a lot, Chris, for your time today. I really appreciate it. Everybody should check out Rumble at rumble.run. You can sign up for a free account up to 256 devices. And I think you guys have a free timed account anyway. If you've got more than that, right? Like you can still get like a free, 30 days?
Yeah. So 21 days is our business trial, the professional edition. And you can scan up to 50,000 devices for those 3 weeks. If you need more, just give us a shout, and we can help you with your tests and your proof of concept. But yeah, it's pretty easy to deploy. Like most people, if they want to run it on their home network, it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to set up, and then they have full visibility. And for companies, of course, like takes a little longer. You might need to ask for permission to deploy it. But especially if you have a flat network, it's also like 10, 15 minutes, and you have your first scan and you have your first data, right? And if you have a more complex network, of course, like different sites, segments that are firewalled off and so on, it's a little more complex, but it's not crazy. Like you don't have to hire a consultant to do it. Yeah,
which is a big barrier, because people don't want to bring in somebody like myself often, because they're like, man, this is going to cost me tens of thousands of dollars. Well, it doesn't, right? Some of the stuff you can do yourself and be like, hey, why do I got this weird Windows XP machine hanging out over here?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, Chris. Hope you have a great day. Everybody who's watching this, have a great day, great weekend. Thanks again for tuning in and having a look at the advance of cybersecurity.
All right. Thank you very much.